Hello, everybody. Welcome to J Movie Talk, episode 349. This week, as you're listening, I am talking about 1987's Fatal Beauty. Hopefully, you've been enjoying what I've been doing for this month. Kicking off the month with Happy Gilmore 2. Then last week's episode where I talked about 1981's Thief. And here we are, 1987. So 6 years later, 1987, we're talking about Fatal Beauty, which stars Whoopi Goldberg. Now, I have posted a few questions across social media and everything asking about what is your favorite Whoopi Goldberg role, and also underrated 80s action films. And at the end of this episode, I will talk about those particular questions that I've asked. So if you're listening and whatever and kind of thinking about, well, what is some of Whoopi's favorite roles? Well, what is some of your favorite Whoopi roles or favorite underrated 80s action films and everything? Because there is definitely quite a bit of action films that are very much underrated, that you don't really hear too much about anymore or whatever, or at the time that they came out. They kind of flew under the radar for whatever reason, but they have a cult following. And I do feel like to some degree that Fatal Beauty has somewhat of a cult following, at least. The fact that this movie, doesn't get talked about as much, and it's a late 80s action crime thriller with Whoopi, in an action role. And it's kind of funny too because of the fact that this movie, it fits right in with it's 2 years after The Color Purple, and is during the time where she kind of goes on what I like to consider like a 3-movie run, even though these movies are not considered the greatest movies, but it's a 3-movie run where Whoopi basically is doing like almost to say kind of action thriller type stuff. And besides this movie, because this is the last of those 3 and everything, but when I was looking, when you kind of look back at it, right, and you look at her career, and because for one thing, I think there's at least a generation, or maybe, I say just a generation. There's a generation of people who don't even realize that Whoopi Goldberg was a whole freaking actress and had a whole career before, and she was a comedian before she even started acting. So she has 2 careers before, she ended up, just kind of being on The View, but she still pops up in and out of movies and stuff like that. But, she had a whole run, and the fact that she's a Oscar winner and she's an EGOT. She's one of the few people who has that, illustrious title of winning an Emmy, a Grammy, an Oscar, and a Tony. So, she is a very talented, person or whatever. But at the same time, people kind of just forget about all of that. Or if they're too young to really remember when she was, in the middle of her run and everything. So there's those of us who remember Whoopi, one type of way. And then there's a whole nother, like the younger generations or whatever, who's like, they just know her for being on The View and don't realize, no, like once upon a time, she was, one of those big, huge names in Hollywood and everything. I mean, the fact that her, Robin Williams, and Billy Crystal, hosted the Oscars together, and everything, that meant a lot. I mean, that lets you know, because she's up there with Robin Williams and Billy Crystal, who were big names at that time also. So, yeah, it just says a lot about, where she was and who she is in a way, and everything. But speaking about her, this, as I refer to it, her trilogy of unofficial trilogy, of course, but her trilogy of, kind of action crime thrillers. So it starts in 1986 with Jumpin' Jack Flash, where she plays a computer whiz who gets, caught up in some wild nonsense and becomes like an espionage type thing, right? Then a year later, which both of these movies came out in the same year. So earlier in 1987, she's in a movie called Burglar, where she plays a cat burglar, and everything. And then this movie, Fatal Beauty, came out in October of 1987. So it's like I refer to that as like her unofficial trilogy of action, espionage, thriller, films or whatever if you want to dub it as. And even though the movies, like I say, they were not considered great movies when they originally came out. I mean, I always liked Jumpin' Jack Flash when I was a kid. Ironically enough, I never watched Fatal Beauty until like years later. So I never saw it around the time, that it probably was being shown and stuff like that. But I remember Jumpin' Jack Flash being on TV quite a bit. Not so much Fatal Beauty, for whatever reason. Which is, like I said, it's kind of weird that certain movies, go that route, but, still. So moving on to talking about a little bit about the plot, and everything for this movie is where Whoopi plays the detective Rita Rizzoli. I'm sorry. She plays Detective Rita Rizzoli. And the interesting thing about that, right, is she was not the original choice for this movie to play that character. And when I found out that the original person that they was actually going to do it, but for some reason they backed out like at the last second, right? And that person I'm talking about is Cher. And it's like, that would have been interesting to see Cher in this movie with it being the same exact way that it is, but just seeing her play the Rizzoli character, I don't know if she would have did it exactly the same way Whoopi did it, or did they make changes to the script, for Whoopi and let Whoopi kind of fly off the handle a little bit, and everything. Because one thing about this movie is that it is somewhat of a Beverly Hills Cop ripoff, because clearly, Rizzoli is just like Axel Foley, Foley, so it's something to be said there. But she plays a narcotics officer, and she's pretty much on the trail of, these drug dealers who is pushing this new drug called Fatal Beauty and everything. And I thought it was very interesting too that there's a line in the movie that even mentions about fentanyl. And I'm like, that's interesting. 1987, fentanyl was talked about, whereas, here in recent years, it's become like a big thing and, notable for, a lot of people ODing and stuff like that because of fentanyl. But I didn't realize it was something that had been around, this long, because like I said, this is 1987. So that's 38 years ago, and everything. So yeah, it's kind of interesting that when I heard that, I was like, wow, okay. But yeah, she's, chasing after, trying to figure out who's pushing this new drug, and everything. But all the while when she's going undercover and stuff like that in these different outfits, and just Whoopi being allowed to kind of, freestyle in a way. Because I can't believe that they wrote a lot of the lines that she say. I feel like they just say, okay, Whoopi, you can just kind of, riff it in a way. And I think she does in quite a bit of the scenes that she's in, and everything. But the whole thing about the war on drugs, because ironically around this time, I mean, the whole DARE thing, because of Nancy Reagan, the whole DARE program, right? Just say no to drugs and all that. So you had a lot of movies coming out around that time that was in somewhat ways PSAs to a degree. And this movie kind of fits into that, little subgenre of, the war on drugs movies and everything. But I do feel like that aspect of the movies to some degree kind of gets lost, because you find yourself focusing more on the action stuff and, Rizzoli. And then when she runs up upon Sam Elliott's character of Martin, I think it's Marchek, I think that's his last name, and everything. But yeah, you kind of lose track of that, even though it's still like prevalent throughout the movie. But you don't really focus so much on that. You kind of focus more on the shoot 'em up that ends up happening throughout the movie, and the fact too that this is one of those rare movies where you had a black female lead, that was typically it was written for a man. Now, granted, this role was always for a woman because, like I say, Cher was supposed to be the original choice for this movie. But it was interesting at a time like to have a movie like this that was led by a black woman. You didn't see that so much in the 80s and everything, which is weird because, the 70s, you have all those black exploitation movies. I mean, the Pam Grier movies and, and all those movies like that where you had a black female lead. But then in the 80s, it's like that kind of went away to a degree. But then again, there's a lot of movies in the 80s where that was, where black people are not really featured as the lead character so much. So, but so like I said, this one does stand out in that regard and everything. And then, like I said, there's that romance subplot between Whoopi and Sam Elliott's character, and it is interesting, seeing them together and everything because one, Sam Elliott being the actor that he is, and this is like around the time where he was pretty much blowing up, because what's weird about Sam Elliott's career is that he had been acting for a long time, but I feel like in the 80s is where his career really takes off, and he's already in his late 40s at that point and everything. And I think it's interesting too that if Cher would have did this movie, this would have been like one of two movies that they were in together, because if you know the movie, Some Kind of Wonderful, with Eric Stoltz, Cher, and Sam Elliott, who plays a biker in that movie. So this would have been like another pairing up between the two, but we do get them in Some Kind of Wonderful together, and which I think that's like a deep cut movie. If you know about that movie and everything, but yeah. So, and I think it was a little controversial because there is a hinted, romance between the two main characters, even though they don't ever like really do anything. Even though I did find out that there was a love scene filmed with Whoopi Goldberg and Sam Elliott, but it didn't make the cut of the movie. So it kind of makes you wonder, like, what was it about? And I know people talk about, oh, well, the chemistry between them wasn't that good and everything like that. I mean, I thought they were pretty good together. I did, but I can see why some people might not think so, because Sam Elliott's character is pretty much like the straight lace character and everything, because he's in a real vicarious position of where he's kind of working for one, the goon, like the main goon basically, and everything. So, well, I should say the main villain. He's more like, he is technically a goon, but he moves more like a cop. And it was almost like, well, why didn't they just make him a outright cop, opposed to like making him, oh, he's head of security for the main villain, to a degree and everything. I always thought that was kind of interesting, because like I say, the way his character moves in the movie is like a cop, and everything. But and he looks like a cop, and he looks like a doggone 1980s Mid-South wrestler or whatever, that maybe he got injured and he's like, you know what, maybe I'll just become a cop or whatever, because that's what he looks like. Because damn it to hell if Sam Elliott could not have played the wrestler Magnum TA in a movie, or whatever. But that's me going on a rant that I don't even want to go down that road, because I would spend the next probably 20-25 minutes just talking about that and making up a whole story that people probably actually might want to see. So the movie, it tries to balance itself between the action, the comedy stuff, and then it tries to throw in the drama stuff. But I think one of the reasons why this movie doesn't necessarily work, especially in 1987, why it probably didn't work so much, is that they were trying to do too much all at one time. Because like I say, you get that action stuff. I mean, at the very beginning, the whole thing with the Brad Dourif character and his partner Leo. Well, he's Leo. What the hell is his partner? I can't remember what the dude's name. He's this big, tall, lanky looking guy. I can't remember what the hell his name was. But he was actually a little bit more scarier than Brad Dourif character. And Brad Dourif character is supposed to be like this madman villain, which I'll talk more about that when I talk more about some of the supporting cast. But when they go in, they shoot up this place and everything. You don't actually see it, but it's just the sheer look on their faces when they're just smiling at the fact that they're gunning these people down. And then some of these other shootouts that we get throughout the movie and everything. Like I say, that part of it, I think, works a little bit more than the comedy stuff, that it's like the movie kind of comes to a halt in certain spots. One scene in particular is when Rizzoli is, interrogating this guy, and she has him in the meat locker, and Ruben Blades' character is pretty much like sitting, he's like standing outside, standing guard basically, and even kind of swaying the cops away to go track down somebody. He said, oh yeah, the other guy, he went out the back and everything. He gets them away just so she can interrogate this guy. But while she's in there talking to him, it's like the movie kind of comes to a halt. And there's a few scenes in the movie where it feels like, okay, the movie just kind of slows down to let Whoopi kind of riff and everything. It's like, yeah, see, if you were a real Beverly Hills Cop, style movie, it had to continuously flow. I think that's one of the things about at least the first two Beverly Hills Cop movies, of what made those movies great with Eddie Murphy, is that the action stuff was, it worked perfect, of course. The drama stuff is there, but then when they're allowing Eddie to do his comedy bits, it flows with the movie. It didn't like just slow everything down. It's like it was like, okay, let's get it in and then let's keep it moving type of thing. Whereas with this movie and everything, yeah, it just kind of slows to a halt for whatever reason. But yeah, so like I say, even though, like I say, watching the movie, I can understand why it was not like a hit back then. So speaking of, characters and the actors and the performances, so a few that pretty much stand out to me. I mean, of course, I talked about Whoopi Goldberg and how she kind of, mixes, the action, the drama, the comedy and stuff all together. And also too, there's a certain scenes where, you kind of feel sympathy for her. Like, there's, even though she's supposed to be like this tough, hard cop and everything, but she has a vulnerable side in the movie. And I thought the relationship that kind of forms between her and James LeGros' character, I thought was kind of interesting and everything, because he's just like this punk kid who he has it out for Rizzoli because she busted one of his friends. And then even when he tries to run up on her in a doggone sandwich shop and everything, and the way she kind of just talks him down and everything is very interesting. And like I say, how they kind of form, or especially after his friends later in the movie end up all ODing and he's the only one that didn't. And I think that's kind of plays up to the vulnerability aspect of it and everything. But then, like I say, Sam Elliott as Mark and everything, he's very, he's very straight laced, he's gruff, it's like, all right, Rizzoli, like, all right, I'm gonna follow you around and all this type of stuff, you're not losing me and everything. But at the same time, he's flirting with her the whole time. He's like, oh, those Italian women, those brown eyes and everything, like, so. And it's like, wait a minute, man, really pushing up on Rizzoli like this? Like he said, screw my job for a second. Let me holler at you real quick and everything. And like, that's what you get throughout the movie. He unofficially like becomes her partner throughout the movie. And it's like, yeah, he should have just been another cop. But I guess they felt they had too many cop characters because, like I said, you got Ruben Blades, that's supposed to be her partner to a degree, but he kind of gets taken out throughout. He don't get killed, but he gets taken out a few times throughout the movie where you kind of forget. And it's like, yeah, Whoopi and Sam Elliott act more like the two cops, even though Sam Elliott character is not a cop. And when you watch the movie, you think that he's a cop and everything. But I thought they played well off each other. I would say one of my favorite scenes of the two of them is when they are in the apartment building, trying to avoid getting gunned down by Brad Dourif and all the other goons that are trying to shoot them, and they kind of working their way through. And like I say, the way they're going through, they moving like an actual team and everything. So yeah, they had chemistry together. I think they have chemistry together. I don't know about you guys, the listeners and everything. If you watched the movie, do you think Whoopi Goldberg and Sam Elliott had good chemistry or bad chemistry in this movie? or did the chemistry not work, I should say, between them? And that's probably a question that I'm gonna ask. I'm gonna throw this question up on Instagram and maybe even Threads also, just to get some, see what other people think about it, and I'll talk about it in the next episode, and everything. But then, like I said, the supporting cast. I mean, there are a couple of character actors that show up in this. I already mentioned about James LaGrosse. This was like one of his earlier roles, and everything. It's always kind of interesting seeing him in movies like this because he was so young, and then when you see him later on, like years later playing, especially like in Point Break, where he has that nasty looking fake goatee mustache or whatever the hell that is. I see you in hell, Johnny. That whole thing. But in other movies that he showed up in, always, you always see him like as an older actor and stuff like that. But when you see him so young and everything, he just fresh face and all that. And when he pops up in here, but then also too, you have freaking Ruben Blades, like I mentioned earlier, who, I mean, he's been around for a long time, and I would say this: no matter what movie Ruben Blades shows up in, he's always good in it. Even if the movie's not necessarily good, he's good in it, and it's always a joy, like, to see him pop up in a movie or even a TV show. Right? It's just something. I don't know, just something about him as an actor that I've always liked. So when he shows up, it's like, oh, okay, yeah. It kind of adds a little weight to the movie, I guess. You have Harrison Yulin as Conrad Kroll, who is the main, villain to a degree, and he's Sam Elliott's boss and everything. And just, it's interesting that even though he's the main villain, he's not really prominent throughout the movie. I mean, you see more of Brad Dourif's Leo throughout than you really do him, and everything. But I thought he was good also. You have John P. Ryan, who plays Lieutenant Kellerman, who's basically Rizzoli's superior, and I feel like they wanted him to be like the Inspector Todd in a way, but he doesn't have that same flash and fire that Inspector Todd had, Gil Hill had, with the way he would talk. Because I would think that would be interesting if you would have had, say, even though this is around the time before Samuel L. Jackson blew up in a way, but let's say if you had Samuel L. Jackson as the Lieutenant Kellerman and going back and forth with Rizzoli, I think that would have been some good stuff, really. Because think about how Inspector Todd, he is with Axel Foley, which I've always had this theory that Inspector Todd was really Axel Foley's dad, but just because of how they act and how Todd, even though Foley does all this nonsense, he's still like, all right, now he's like, he turns kind of fatherly in a way. And even in the third movie, which we do not talk about, Beverly Hills Cop 3, but in the third movie when his character gets killed off and just how hurt of Axel is, like, he is almost like a father-son type dynamic. So also too, you have Charles Halloran, who plays Detective Getz, who is probably best known as Norris in The Thing and other movies. He's one of those character actors. You might not know his name, but when you see his face, you know who he is, or whatever. The whole riffing between him and Rizzoli throughout the movie, even though there is some kind of underhand, racist jokes throughout this movie, and it's like, yeah, okay. Because, I mean, there's one particular thing at the beginning of the movie where she gets called a black bitch and everything, and her whole thing was like, don't call me bitch or whatever. And it's like, yeah, but he also called you Nosferatu too. And I'm not saying the real N word. I'm using Nosferatu as the N word, and the word I'm talking about, right? But it's just interesting, like, that's what you didn't like being called. Didn't have a problem with him calling you Nosferatu, but okay, I guess. And okay, the guy who plays Brad Dourif's partner, his name is Earl. That was his name. I don't know why I couldn't remember his name, freaking Earl. I don't know why I want to call him like Joe Bob or something. But anyway, I mean, that dude was kind of scary and menacing, because there's one scene in the movie which was like, why the hell did he do this? And that is where he bites a glass bottle, and chews it up, and then he spits it out in the glass. So you got blood and glass on it, and the dude sitting there like, what the fuck, type of thing. But I thought he was kind of a scary dude too. And it took a while for them to bring him down. And then of course my favorite, that's why I'm saving him for last, and I'm talking about Mr. Brad Dourif, who plays Leo Nova. And so I have to talk about Brad Dourif for a second. So this is where the podcast kind of comes to a halt, to talk about Brad Dourif, because I mean, yes, he is Chucky, Charles Lee Ray. He's been in all these other movies. He was in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, where he was nominated for an Oscar. Like I said, man's been in countless movies. But when you see him in this movie, I don't know what they had going on. And I always kind of like to say that because of the fact that this movie was directed by Tom Holland, who did Fright Night and Child's Play, which Child's Play comes out after this, I feel like the Leo Nova character is like a more ultra-violent version of Charles Lee Ray. And ironically enough, the way his character is killed off at the end of this movie is very much similar to how Chucky is killed at the end of Child's Play. But yeah, him running around with this, submachine gun and everything, shooting up, and then he's dressed like a 1940s freaking jazz musician or something. And that hair, I don't know why he got this hair. It's almost, I don't know what the hell that was. And the way it's like, is parted to the side and it's covering like half of his eye and everything. I'm like, who the hell he thought he was, a Lee or something? Or did she get this look from him? I don't know. But he is a joy in this movie. I mean, granted, he's one of those actors too, similar to like Ruben Blades. It doesn't matter how good or bad the movie might be, they are always good in it. And I don't think he's one of those actors I don't think could ever give a bad performance. I really don't think so. I've never seen him in anything where it's like, damn, Brad Dourif kind of sucked in this or whatever. I've never seen that. He always gives 1,000% or whatever. But yeah, it's just wild, like seeing him in this role. And it's like, damn, wish we'd have got to see a little bit more of Charles Lee Ray in Child's Play. Because I mean, what we get of him in the beginning, is basically the last night of his life before he, because Charles Lee Ray dies and Chucky is born, right? But I feel like if we would have got to see more of the Charles Lee Ray character, I think it would have been a little bit similar to what we get with the Leo Nova character. So for anyone who's a Child's Play fan, definitely watch this and you might understand where I'm going with the whole Leo Nova and the Charles Lee Ray comparison and everything. But I will ask this question. Did Whoopi prove that she could be an action star with this movie? Because again, I mean, she does a few action movies, but I would say of the three, I still think Jumpin' Jack Flash is a little bit better, but I feel like here she gets to do more of, the actual physical, the action stuff and running around shooting and flipping and all that type of stuff. So did Whoopi prove that she could be an action star and everything? So because even though when we get out of the 80s and into the 90s, you rarely see her do a bunch of action anymore. So in a way, this is kind of like the last like true through and through action movie that she does. But I feel like, yeah, she could have done more action if she wanted to, but I think she leaned more into, what was her bread and butter, which was the comedy stuff. Even though in Ghost, it's a serious movie and everything, but her character, Oda Mae Brown, I mean, it does give a lot of the laughs in that movie and everything. And that's what she won her Oscar for, right? And everything. So, yeah, that's a question that, that I would love to know what you guys think. So you can either hit me up, you can email me at jmovietalk@gmail.com and let me know what you guys think. And I'll read results on the next episode, as well as the other question that I asked also. So another thing about this movie, like I said, I made the comparison of Beverly Hills Cop, but also there's a little bit of Lethal Weapon, especially Lethal Weapon 2 vibes here. Because you're dealing with the whole, drugs and things of that nature and everything. And then also too, another movie that came out relatively close around this time, Running Scared, with Billy Crystal and Gregory Hines, which I reviewed a while back on the podcast also. So this movie kind of fits in with those movies, but it gets lost in the shuffle to a degree, because what made those movies work necessarily doesn't really work here. And especially with the Beverly Hills Cop, where, like say, Foley and Rizzoli pretty much, like say, are like mirrors of each other. It's just that I think because Tom Holland even talked about, like, he kind of wished that he didn't make this movie. It was him trying to get out of just doing the horror stuff that he was known for. He wanted to do something a little different. I don't think he should have necessarily been the director to do this movie. I think if it was in the hands of a more action experienced director, I think it might have worked better. And that's not a slight at Tom Holland. I think he was better at doing the stuff that he was good at doing. Fright Night is a great movie. Child's Play is a great movie. You know, those movies were great, and that was more of his wheelhouse. Whereas here, I think he kind of came out of his comfort zone, which is not a bad thing. It's good to come out of your comfort zone, but at the same time, I think there was limitations to what he could do as a director to make this story really work. And I actually believe that if this movie was remade, I think with a director who actually, you know, has more experience of making this style of movie, I think it will work probably better than what he did. Even though I do enjoy the movie. I will say that here right now, that I do enjoy the movie, but I enjoy it in the sense of it's an 80s movie, and like I say, it's an action movie, and I just have fun with the movie. But at the same time, I can look and see, like, okay, I can see why in 1987, why the movie probably didn't work in comparison to, you know, the other 80s cop thrillers that came out around this time. I can see why it don't necessarily work. And the fact too that, I mean, they did take a risk with putting a woman in the role, because I don't think it would have been any better if Cher would have played the role either. I just don't think the movie, because like I say, trying to look at it and think about what Cher would have did different. One, I don't think her comedic timing would have been as good as Whoopi's and everything, but also at the same time, audiences at that time wasn't really checking for action movies like this with women in the roles. I mean, granted, you know, Sigourney Weaver did, you know, change the game with Aliens and everything, but that's, you know, more sci-fi and stuff like that. But we're talking about just a straight action type oriented movie and everything. I don't think audiences was really checking for women in those type of roles at that time. I know it sucks to say that, but, you know, looking at how things were at that time, it wasn't a big thing. I mean, in the 90s, yes, you know, that became more of a thing, but unfortunately in the 80s, you know, it hadn't really caught on like this. So in a way, I would say this movie was somewhat ahead of its time. Or even if it would have came out in the 90s, I think it might have did better. And everything. Just unfortunately, it comes out at the time that it came out, surrounded by the movies that it's surrounded by. Because again, that's what you're going to compare it to. And also too, even though Whoopi was a very good actress, I mean, she was nominated for an Oscar in The Color Purple, which came out a few years before this. But when you look at the movies that she did after The Color Purple and before Sister Act and Ghost and everything, it's not so, you know, her career right there is not, you know, not the greatest as far as movie and box office and everything, which, like I say, she in the 90s, she leans more into what her strengths were to a degree. And then also too, the interracial kind of romance thing, you know, that was still somewhat of a taboo thing, right? I mean, Spike Lee made a whole movie about jungle fever, right? You know, and everything. So I think there was a lot going against this movie back in 1987 and everything. Unfortunate, but like I say, if the movie came out in the 90s, or like especially in the mid 90s or even the early 2000s, I think Fatal Beauty gets better received than what it did coming out in the mid late 80s and everything. But I do feel like it has a cult following today, because I think if you someone who enjoy movies and you bring up Fatal Beauty and you say, okay, check this movie out and let me know what you think, I'm pretty sure people, they look at it in with 2025 eyes and be like, oh, you know what, this is actually a pretty decent movie. But like say, looking at it in 1987 eyes, it was very much ahead of its time in a way. But the fact that it does get, you know, quite a bit of rotation now because it is streaming on, it's on Prime, it's on Tubi, and everything. I think it's on Tubi. I know it's on Pluto, but I think it's on Tubi also. But you know, it does get rotation, people check it out and everything like that. So it's one of those movies that I feel like, yes, it was very much ahead of its time and should, you know, people should check it out, especially if you like this style of action and everything. So I would ask, so looking back on this movie, and I will say this, kind of continuing on what I was just saying, of where Fatal Beauty does deserve to, like, if you look at it in modern eyes, I think it works better. And it kind of got me thinking, like, okay, if this movie did get remade, who could possibly, you know, star as the Rizzoli character? Would I necessarily keep it as a black actress? Maybe, but just a woman in general, I think would still work as the lead role. But if it was going to be a black woman, I could see someone like, ironically enough, and this is me just thinking about this off the cuff right now, for some reason Regina Hall popped in my head for some reason. I could almost see her playing this role, even though Regina Hall doesn't normally play like action type movies and everything. She's more comedy and drama. But I think if she was in a movie, like, let's say if we're doing Fatal Beauty in 2025 and you have Regina Hall as the Rita Rizzoli character, I think she could pull it off. I really do. I really believe that she would be able to pull this off, and everything. And then you can kind of get, now who would be the Sam Elliott character? I think would be a little bit tougher, because who's a like late 40s, early 50s actor that has the same type of machismo, if you will, that Sam Elliott had, you know, back in the 80s. That now I think that role would be a little bit more tougher to cast necessarily than the Rizzoli part. So yeah, it's just something to kind of think about. And I always like having fun, especially with movies like this, movies that don't necessarily work at the time that they were released. Those are the movies I like to kind of think about and be like, I wonder how those movies will work now and who could be cast in those roles now, opposed to movies that were huge, massive hits when they came out back in the day. And then they decide, oh, we're going to remake that, you know, and everything. It's like, why the hell are you remaking something that worked? If, you know, it worked when it came out and people still love it. Let's look at the ones that might have had a good premise or good intentions or good ideas behind them, and let's try to improve upon those. That's one thing about remakes that always kind of boggle my mind to some degree, is that you rather remake a movie that works opposed to something that didn't necessarily work at the time that they came out, and try to, you know, improve upon that. So, and then too, I mean, if I had to pick a funny scene that stands out, it'd probably be when Rizzoli when she goes to see James LaGrosse's mother, his character's mother, and this is after he, you know, ends up in the hospital, and she goes to see his mother and find out that she's the one that actually got the whole fentanyl, the Fatal Beauty is what I should call it. She got that whole thing, and it's because of her is why he even got kind of linked up with that, and why his friends end up ODing. So when she goes to see her and actually talking to her about, you know, what's going on with her son and everything, and this woman is being very abrasive, being a little racist too, and they get into this fight, and then Rizzoli ends up basically knocking the woman through the glass window and everything, and everybody's like, what the hell is going on? And then freaking Sam Elliott character, he got to show up and basically hoist Rizzoli away and everything. I thought that was like a funny stand-up thing. But then Whoopi has a lot of one-liners in this movie. Like I say, the whole riffing between her and the cops. And it kind of don't matter who she goes against, because even when she's talking to Conrad Kroll, when she first introduced to him, and she pretty much, basically, make a comedic remark about the man dick size. And it's like, Jesus. Like what we do? Matter of fact, she does that to two characters. I just thought about it. She does it to the Conrad Kroll character, and she does it to the dude that she has in the meat locker. When she's interrogating him, and she's like using her gun to pat him up. It's like, what is that? It's like that is pitiful. Like, so you get jokes like that throughout the movie. But like I said, there's quite a bit of one-liners that she has throughout the movie, and it just shows like, yeah, Whoopi is a very funny actress, and everything. But then also too, you got the over the top villains, because like I say, Leo Nova and Earl, they are over the top, very much over the top. They are very ultra violent in this movie, and the fact that, like I say, when they're shooting and just having like smiles on their face and everything, it's like, yeah, these dudes are insane, and it just makes you wonder like, what the hell are they on, and everything. So, I mean, I pretty much talked about a lot of what I felt did work and what didn't work. I mean, the performances, I feel like I think Whoopi works. Her performance as Rizzoli, it works. Sam Elliott, I think his performance works. Some of the side characters, because like I say, Ruben Blades, even though he's good in the movie, but I don't think he necessarily works, and he was actually necessary. Because once again, once you get Sam Elliott's character involved, Ruben Blades' character really becomes like an afterthought. So it's like, well, what was really the reason of having his character around if you was going to have Sam Elliott be her, like, quote unquote true partner, even though Ruben Blades' character is her official partner and everything. I think the Conrad Kroll character, I don't think he was truly necessary, because it's like, okay, you not really, he's the main villain, but he gets treated like a secondary villain to Leo Nova and Earl, who are the ones that's like really going around doing all of the stuff. Like, they're the ones that she's really, tracking down and everything, not so much the Conrad Kroll character. So it's like almost like he wasn't really necessary. So like I said, there's things in this movie that do work. At certain points in times, like I say, it doesn't know exactly what movie it wants to be. Is it an action movie? Is it a comedy? It's like it doesn't really know. And I think that falls more on, like I say, what they were going for. And a lot of that, unfortunately, falls onto Tom Holland, right? Who admitted himself, talking about the movie. He says that when Cher backed out, he probably should have did the same thing. And everything, because I'm pretty sure and that kind of makes me think that the movie is going to be a little different than what the final product of the movie is. I think if Cher was there, I think the movie would have had a different tone to it, to a degree. But like I said, when Cher left and then they cast Whoopi, I think that kind of changed up a lot of what they were going to do. And the fact that the character's name is Rita Rizzoli, and she's supposed to be an Italian woman, but it's played by a black woman. It is like, okay, you didn't even change the name. Y'all didn't change anything regarding the character. And it's like, okay. So like I say, a lot of the things, there's some hits and misses about this movie, and which I feel is reason why it could work if they remade it, improve upon the things that do work. I feel like, and also too, how would this movie be received if it came out today? I wonder. One, would it play at the movie theater, or would it be on a streaming service? And I would say, if we're going with my fantasy casting of Regina Hall as the Rita Rizzoli character, I think it would be on a streaming service. Not saying that all Regina Hall is not box office or anything like that, but movies like this in general these days, unless you have like a huge, movie star, quote unquote, name attached to it as the star, is going to a streaming service to a degree. So it probably end up like on Netflix or even Prime or something like that. Apple TV maybe is where it probably end up and everything. But I think it would do fine if it went on a streaming service or whatever and everything. So earlier I brought up about like favorite Whoopi Goldberg role. Let's talk about some of my favorite Whoopi performances. So The Color Purple is always one. I mean, I would say that's always like top 3. And the fact that that was her first movie, it just showed like, yeah, she could do this. And the fact that she was a comedian that was going into that type of a role and how she just dove into playing a Seeley character, that is one of my favorite roles of hers. Oda Mae Brown in Ghost. I mean, I think after thinking about Patrick Swayze, I think Whoopi Goldberg as Oda Mae is the character that you think about the most. Or it might be Willie Lopez. But that's a whole nother story. But no, what she does with that, and that's where she shines like best in that movie, because she's playing to her strengths a lot. Also, I think her character in Sister Act, especially the first one. The second one, I mean, she still doing more of the same, but I think in the first one, she, as Dolores, she really, shows, again, she's showing that range of like why she's a very good actress, in my opinion, especially when you get to see her a little bit more in her old life before she ends up going, into witness protection, going into, being a nun and everything. Whatever. Those movies are the ones that I always kind of, lean to when I think about like favorite Whoopi performances. But ironically enough, I do enjoy her performance in Fatal Beauty. I think she's having fun with it. I think she's like one of the few people who's actually having fun in this movie, and everything. Also, too, her character in Jumpin' Jack Flash, even though it's been a long time since I watched Jumpin' Jack Flash, because anytime I think about that movie, I think about the scene where she gets her dress caught in the doggone shredder, and she's just struggling trying to get out of it and everything. But I think she does a good job in that movie also, and everything. So she has some very interesting performance. Her career is a very interesting one. When you look at her filmography, it is very interesting, and everything. But I would like to know more, like, what do you guys think about as far as favorite Whoopi performances? So again, you can either email me at jmovietalk@gmail.com. Also, I will be talking about this on Twitch, since I have started the whole Twitch thing. If you listen to the last episode, I did make the announcements that I am now doing Twitch and everything like that. So Thursday night, where I do my cinema after dark thing, where it's almost like a companion to the podcast in a way. I will be talking more about underrated 80s action movies, so you can definitely hit me up over on Twitch. I will have that in the show notes and everything, but it is twitch.tv /the_real, that's REEL _JAY. So you definitely, if you want to be a part of the conversation and talk with me over there, join the chat and we can talk about some of our favorite underrated, 80s action movies and everything like that. I think that's a movie I do need to watch or whatever. But yeah, definitely over on Twitch, you can check me out on Thursday nights, and everything. And then also on Mondays, like in the mornings and stuff like that, I'm doing my, what I call the vault sessions, cause I'm in the middle of reorganizing my movies collection, cause it's kind of out of order at this point. And I thought it'd be kind of fun thing to do, kind of get on live and kind of, organize my movies and talk about movies and stuff like that and everything. So over on Twitch, Mondays and Thursdays, Monday mornings around 10 o'clock and, around 9:30, 10 o'clock at night where I do the cinema after dark. So like I said, if you want to check me out and, join the chat and stuff like that and talk about different things, definitely follow me over on Twitch as well. Let's see. So that's pretty much it for this episode. If I had to rate this movie, I would probably give it, as far as rewatchability, because it is a movie that I have been rewatching quite often recently, and that's kind of the reason why I even decided to do it for this podcast. I would give, as far as rewatchability, I would give it a solid 3. But if it was just strictly based off the movie, it's a 2.5. And everything, because like I say, even though there are things I do like about it, but there are a few things of where it's like, this could have been a little bit better, and I can understand why it did not perform as well back in the 80s. So yeah, that's pretty much it for that. Next week I will be finishing up, for the most part, the month of August, which it's like this month is going by fast, but I'm doing a movie that I've been wanting to do for a minute on the podcast. And actually, 2 of these movies that I'm doing this month are movies that I've been wanting to do for a while, and I'm finally getting around to doing them. Thief was the one that I wanted to do for a long time on the podcast. And the movie that I'll be doing next week is another one I've been wanting to do for a while on the podcast. I'm talking about Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, starring Robert Downey Jr. and the late Val Kilmer, and everything like that. I'm looking forward to talking about that movie very much, because I have a lot of thoughts on that movie and everything. But yeah, that is what I'll be doing next week for episode 350. So it's like we're inching closer and closer to the illustrious 400 and everything. So if you have any thoughts about the movie Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, you can definitely, like I say, email me at jmovietalk@gmail.com, or join me over on Twitch before I do the movie and everything. If you have any thoughts or whatever about Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, let me know what you think about that movie, and we can probably have a little discussion about it over there before I actually do the podcast, right? And everything. So of course you can follow me all across socials at jmovietalk, of course on Instagram at JMT Podcast, or my personal page, The J Giles. You can find all of the Movie Talk episodes are part of the TV Zone Podcast Network. Wherever you listen to your favorite podcast, just type in TV Zone Podcast Network, and you'll find all the Movie Talk episodes, as well as the other shows are part of the network as well. Also, I'm over on YouTube. J Movie Talk is over on YouTube as well. I have started slowly posting little shorts from some of my Twitch streams as well. I have one up now where I was talking about the movie Alligator, which for a long time listeners, you remember when I did that episode, but I did a little short clip of Alligator, just talking about that. And you will start to see like little more shorts that I decided to post over there for my Twitch streams and things like that. So definitely follow me over on YouTube. So if you're listening on YouTube, definitely comment down below your thoughts about Fatal Beauty, the questions that I've asked, which I will put those in a pinned comment as well. So you can definitely, continue to have the conversation over there as well. Again, thank you guys for listening. I will be back for episode 350 to talk about Kiss Kiss Bang Bang. Until next time, peace.